On July 1st, 2024, a 45-minute flight from Rwanda's capital, Kigali, to the largest city in the neighboring country of Burundi costs $456. On the same day, an 8-hour and 45-minute flight from Kigali to London's Heathrow Airport is sold for just $513. Both routes are operated by Rwanda's national airline, Rwanda Air. The elephant in the room is that it only costs $57 more to fly a route that is 38 times the distance between Kigali and the city of Bujumbura. This goes without saying, Heathrow Airport is also one of the world's most expensive airports for airlines to operate out of. This is a recurring theme across the African continent, where intercontinental flights often cost the same as short international and domestic routes, if not less. But why? There's not one singular answer to this. Rather, it is a combination of different factors that make air travel within Africa incredibly expensive. Africa as a continent, as of 2023, accounts for 18% of the world's population. Meanwhile, African air travel is only accountable for less than 2% of global aviation. Now, one might think there are a few factors that could bring flight prices down, such as cheaper labor costs and Africa's massive oil deposits. However, this is not the case. The major oil-producing countries in Africa actually rank quite high globally, but when you compare it to jet fuel production, they fall short to the more developed nations. They simply don't have the proper infrastructure to produce jet fuel, which forces the airlines to import it from other parts of the world at a greater cost. Another major problem is limited competition. Most air routes in Africa only has one airline operating it. Take this flight from Lagos, Nigeria to Luanda, Angola, for instance. Currently, TAAG Angola is the only operator between the two cities, with metro populations of 16 and 9 million respectively. Meanwhile, this route, which is similar in distance from Berlin to Athens, is operated by 3 different airlines, despite having smaller populations. Having only one airline controlling an air route means they can set the price at practically whatever they want, with limited repercussions. The third problem is the continent's limited infrastructure, including airports that suffer from fewer amenities and higher operating costs. For example, only a third of sub-Saharan Africa's runways are paved, compared to 87% in East Asia, according to data from the World Bank. Another issue is skyrocketing taxes and landing fees. The governments of most African nations impose taxes on flights higher than anywhere else in the world. For most international flights within Africa, around 50% of the ticket price is for the flight itself, while the remaining 50%, give or take, goes to the respective governments in the form of taxes. This leads on to the next issue, which is the stubbornness of the respective airlines and governments. There are few collaborations between the already struggling African airlines as opposed to other parts of the world where major airlines make alliances. Take the alliance between KLM and Air France, for instance. You could actually book a KLM flight on Air France's website and vice versa. The International Air Transport Association's regional vice president for the Middle East and Africa said the following on the issue. There is a hard-headedness where each state thinks they know how to handle it better and will stick to their remedies even when they are not very effective.
Because of course it's not just domestic flights, it's country to country, and that's where the problems started showing up.
You could argue this reluctance to work together has led some countries to refuse the open sky policy, effectively only allowing specific airlines to fly within their sovereign airspace. As an example, for the sake of simplicity, If you wanted to fly from Ghana to Morocco and Mali had closed their airspace for Ghanaian airlines, the airline would have to take a considerable detour. As a result of longer flight time and higher fuel usage, flight costs rise significantly, which are subsequently brought upon the passenger. Another major problem is the low load factor. Airlines simply aren't able to fill their airplanes. If you have an airplane with 200 seats, but only 50 people buy a ticket, a majority of the economic deficit the airline suffers from the remaining seats are once again transferred onwards to the passenger. When you look at the median income of most African countries, it should come as no surprise that airlines aren't able to sell all their tickets. For many Africans, just stepping into an airplane is an unattainable luxury which they simply can't afford. For instance, the flight route I mentioned earlier from Kigali to Bujumbura cost $456. Meanwhile, the median income of a Burundi national is just $240 per year, according to a study by Statista. It doesn't require rocket science to imagine why someone doesn't want to spend 2 years' worth of salary on a 45-minute one-way flight. Combined with the strict visa requirements enforced by many African nations, it makes it practically impossible for the average African to travel to another country by air. Corruption definitely plays a part in the high ticket prices as well. I don't want to dive too much into it, as it is a very complicated matter and varies from country to country. But due to the fact that most African nations rank in the bottom half of the Corruption Perception Index, it is hard to imagine a massive industry like the aviation industry isn't being affected by corruption one way or another. There is one diamond in the dust, however, namely Ethiopian Airlines. Though it primarily uses its hub in the capital Addis Ababa to connect travelers from other continents to major destinations in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as domestic flights within Ethiopia, it is a start, and a blueprint for other African airlines to follow. Ethiopian Airlines has quadrupled its number of employees over the past 20 years. During that same period of time, Ethiopia went from being one of the poorest countries in the world to being one of the fastest growing. As it seems, African aviation remains in a stalemate for now, and probably will continue to do so for a while. If the major African airlines such as Rwanda Air and Ethiopian Airlines expands with the aim to connect the African continent together and allow for competitiveness, there should still be hope. The International Air Transport Association argues that if just 12 key countries in Africa worked together to improve connectivity and opened up their markets, it would create 155,000 jobs and boost those countries' GDP by more than $1.3 billion.